kind of compare it to the Mark Trestman hiring in the NFL.
Yeah.
If it works, you look like a genius, but if it doesn't work, you're like, what the heck were you thinking? And right now it's looking more towards what the heck were you thinking than, the next great NBA coach in the mold of, Larry Brown or somebody like that.
For sure. Like, last caller said kind of the same thing, and we've brought that up. I mean, obviously, I think the Cavs went one direction with a coach just a hair before they found out things were going to go the other direction with LeBron, and I think that obviously you've almost got two worlds clashing because that was somebody that was going to coach young and was going to, develop, and then now you've got a completely different situation on your hands.
Yeah, and, again, as LeBron, obviously I don't know what he had in the last game. It was over 30 or whatever.
He had 33 last night, yeah.
Yeah.
He still had 5 turnovers. You can see the rust in his game. It's going to take some time, but he looked better.
Yeah.
As far as explosiveness, he definitely looked better. Boy, that Ohio State game sure bucked him up. He felt better, man.
So, at some point, just because he is so good, he's going to elevate the team to a certain extent. And before he had to sit out for how many games, if you think about before the hiccup, whatever they've lost, 6, 7 straight, it was not great, but you take 20-12 or whatever the record was and say, that's not bad. You can build off that. I think that's the kind of team where they are right now. Than this little hiccup they've had. But obviously it's got to get turned around sooner rather than later.
For sure. Second half of the season, they'll be one of the better teams in the East. They'll close the gap. They'll finish, in a decent place, but a lot of room to grow from there. I wanted to ask you because I was like, hey, man, John, it'd be an interesting conversation here, but let's switch over. Obviously, you and I love to talk some football every week here on the show, and there was some great football. Before we even do anything else, man, last week's games, a good slate of games, couple of really good ones when you look at the near upsets on the road with the Baltimore. Boy, they gave the Patriots everything they could handle. I gotta start there. Because I got to ask you about Bill Belichick. I kind of said my piece about him earlier this week on the show. A lot of people don't like the Patriots. They don't like Belichick. They want to say what they want. I don't care. To me, the ultimate of your profession is figuring out how to do something nobody else has ever done, how to do something different or better or something that nobody else has ever planned for. And much like the first time somebody did a double reverse flea flicker or one of those crazy gadget plays, I know there's deception involved, but man, how can people get on a guy for sitting down and figuring out something nobody else ever thought of before? To me, that's the definition of being a genius at what you do. Of course, referring to Belichick with the modified offensive line and the who's eligible, who's ineligible receivers. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. It speaks to his innovation, his mind. It speaks to the fact that he's, the best coach in football, and he's, I wrote about it last week. I said John Harbaugh is in the conversation for being the second best coach, but the gap between 2 and 1 is growing by the day. I mean, nobody's even close to him, and the bashing is sour grapes because, and Harbaugh kind of led on when, after he was complaining about it, he kind of admitted no one's ever thought of it before. That's not a legitimate criticism. He was playing within the rules. And here's the part that impresses me that nobody seems to understand. The fact that you do that mid-game, it wasn't in the game plan. He only did it because the center went down with an injury. And he said, well, I don't have a lot of confidence in Josh Klein, a backup. I don't have a lot of depth, so let me try this. And it worked. And there's two things to that. The fact, obviously, the in-game adjustments, which are always talked about. Fans love to talk about it. But they don't understand that how little of that goes on. Coaches are so rigid to their game plan. They when the bullets are flying, the average coach just sticks by his plan. Belichick's the only one that literally changes gears on his feet during a game. And the second part of it is, and this is the bigger aspect, he has to have those players prepared to do that and teach them. That's something Shane Vereen's not used to doing. That's something a tight end is not used to doing. When you talk about pre-snap penalties, these are guys typically lined up as skill position players. They don't normally understand they have to be covered on the line of scrimmage, for instance. So he has to have taught these players this in advance for just this moment in a particular game when somebody goes down with an injury. So the preparation aspect of it is something I haven't heard anyone talk about, and that part of it is so far ahead of everybody else. And then to come up with the strategy and say, okay, we're going to use it mid-game in the divisional playoffs against the Baltimore Ravens, who are red hot. It's unbelievable. And say what you want about it. I don't care if you don't like him or not. He's the best coach in football.
I'm telling you, Bruce has a great point. The only thing that stops me from just absolutely loving Belichick is the fact that he cut Bernie Kosar way back in the day when, of course, but yeah, I'm with you 100%. I think about, I was saying the double reverse, but think of the first time, obviously the Music City Miracle is a big famous version of it, but think of the first time a team did, and I don't know what it is, who it was, that did a full field length, throwback pass like that on a kick. Up until then, nobody ever thought on a return that you would have to cover a pass or you'd have to keep your eye open for that. The first time somebody did it, you had to think the thought was, that's illegal. That's not a legal play. You can't do that. And they said, well, yeah, you can. And then all of a sudden, from that point forward, it became part of how you coach special teams. Hey, you've got to always cover the gap here because you want to make sure they don't throw it in the lane or throw it across the field or whatever. Same thing. To me, yeah, there's deception, but anytime something like that is come up with, it's naturally a part of it, and then it becomes a part of the game.
Isn't that what half of offensive football and defensive football, for that matter?
That's what you're supposed to do.
Well, a defense is constantly, we know exactly who came up with his own blitz. It was Dick LeBeau.
Yes.
Before nobody ever did it before.
Yeah. I use that.
You
as
think
an example.
that's not trying to deceive the quarterback by dropping a defensive end in the coverage?
Don't you think people were thinking it was illegal somehow to just bring the whole team up to the line and have you have to figure out who's going to blitz and who's going to drop back? And some offensive coordinator said, hey, man, this ain't right. But then they adapt and they adjust. And that same thing here. Now there's something new that teams have to be aware of. And I like what you said, too. Forgetting just about the actual usage of it. But to you didn't know when. That wasn't a game-specific thing to prepare your team for that and just say, hey, look, guys, I can't tell you when, but we may use this sometime. So here's what I'm with you there on the advanced preparation of that too.
Yeah, and to me, that's the bigger aspect of it because it proves, you're not only teaching your players, but you're trusting your players. And, that's one thing coaches have a difficult problem with, and that's why they don't adjust. I've talked about it before in general circumstances. Bill Belichick is the only coach in football in years that literally changes will not on a week-to-week basis, but he will if he feels it'll help him win. One week he'll play a 4-3. Next week he'll play a 3-4 if he thinks his opponent, if that gives him a better chance to win. What other defensive coordinator, what other defensive team have you ever seen morph its entire philosophy from 4-3 to 3-4 in 1 week? It doesn't happen. He's so far ahead of the curve as far as morphing his team and teaching his team from week to week. It's not even funny.
You're right.
Nobody else has the confidence to do that type of thing. And, whether that speaks to their lack of trust in their own players or their lack of trust in being able to teach them different things, because I can tell you firsthand, the whole philosophy in the NFL as a whole, both offensively and defensively, unless you have a quarterback like, we all know Brady, Manning, Rodgers, whoever, is to make it as simple as possible. You look at the defensive side of the ball. That's what the Tampa 2 is, to make it as simple as possible. 4-3, cover 2 shell. The 2 safeties have half the field, zone concept. They're trying to simplify things for their players. And that, to me, is the opposite of what you should be doing. And it's the opposite of what a coach like Bill Belichick does, and why he's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer.
For sure, week-to-week game planning. We jokingly talk when we do our fantasy football segments every week about how, he's the bane of fantasy football existence, because you don't know who to rely on from the Patriots for week to week. It could be any running back. One week a guy scores 4 touchdowns, the next week he doesn't touch the ball. It could be.
And I love that about him too, because I'm not the biggest fantasy football guy in the world.
Oh, there you go.
I love that about him too.
But you know what? A buddy, 2 different people and I were talking last night, and it was funny because each one was in opposite camp. One guy was with us. He's like, "Man, that was genius." Another guy was like, "Oh man, that was some hokey stuff there." But my buddy and I were laughingly comparing it to that scene in Semi-Pro where they invented the alley-oop, and everybody
alley-oop.
just stopped.
I was just going to bring that up.
And they
Jackie
look at each
Moon.
other. It's a foul. How?
Obviously it was overstated. But,
yeah.
You don't even have to go, as I said, you don't even have to go that far and back in NFL history. You could point to Dick LeBeau, as I said, on the defensive side of the ball. On the offensive side of the ball, you can point to the read option, or a few years before that, the Wildcat, when everybody had difficulty trying to figure that out. Generally, they catch up to these things, and certainly, if people continue to do what Bill Belichick did with the 4 offensive linemen, people will figure it out and catch up to it. It's not that difficult. You just have to pay attention and listen to who the official says is ineligible, and then you treat them like a blocker. It's not that difficult. It's just no one had ever thought of it before. No one had ever done it before. And the Ravens are sitting there looking at Shane Vereen and saying, "Oh, I better get on Shane Vereen," even though he wasn't eligible.
Hey, and that's a compliment to the Ravens, too, that was the point in time that he felt we need to pull this out because it's going to take something like that to win this game, and they did, and I give them credit. To me, that was a hell of a victory to come back from down 14 points twice, looking beyond just that part of the game, to come back from down 2 touchdowns twice in that game and to hold off the Ravens, because the Ravens gave them everything that they could handle, and New England truly deserved to win that game.
Yeah, and I would argue the Ravens were certainly playing better, and for whatever reason had their number. They beat them twice in Foxborough before that game.
Yep.
And they looked like they're on their way to their 3rd victory. So physically it might be a bad matchup for New England, and you saw a coach completely change momentum in the game by coming up, and that It also speaks to Belichick as if you ever heard him go off on one of his tangents, he's a real historian of the game. He loves the history of the game, and he's the kind of guy who's going to sit down and read that arcane rule book we always talk about, the over legislation of the NFL. And there are a lot of coaches in this league, and when I say a lot, I mean a lot, who don't understand some of the rules in the game, which is astonishing. And I blame that more on the NFL than anything. But it's not Bill Belichick, because he's going to actually sit down and study it and figure it out.
You're listening to, you got that right. You're listening to the Sports Fix, J-Rock, John McMullen. We're talking a little NFL football here, and stay in the AFC. Go on the other side, man. What were your thoughts coming out of Denver and the Colts? Obviously, a big win for Luck and the Colts, and things have now, man, they've really started that ball rolling in Denver. Fox is out. They're going to clean out the coaches. Where do you see things going? We were talking about it a bit yesterday. You've obviously got to replace coaches in Denver. You've got 17, 18 unrestricted free agents, some big ones as part of that, obviously, quarterback, wide receiver, tight end. A lot of decisions for the Broncos to make, man. How do you see, first off, what did you think about how quickly everything went there?